For over 2 centuries, ferries have crossed the Hudson River at Kingston. On one October night, a veteran captain vanished without a trace. For 240 years, the Kingston and Rhinecliff ferry has carried travelers across the Hudson River between Ulster County and the town of Rhinebeck. The route, first established in 1784, follows the same path through deep waters that Revolutionary War soldiers once traversed under cover of darkness. On any given day, the ferry makes 16 round trips, carrying commuters, tourists, and locals between the steep wooded banks that rise from the water's edge like ancient sentinels. Captain Dutch Vandenberg knew every ripple and current of that crossing. For 34 years, he had guided ferries across the Hudson's dark waters, learning the river's moods through decades of dawn departures and midnight runs. At 62, Vandenberg was the senior captain on the route, a man whose great-great-grandfather had operated horse-drawn ferries on the same crossing in the 1800s. The river, colleagues often said, was in his blood. On the night of October 14, 2023, Vandenberg began what would become his final crossing. The ferry departed the Kingston terminal at 3:15 a.m., carrying only 2 vehicles and their sleeping passengers on the late-night run. Weather conditions were calm, with light fog drifting between the Catskill Mountains to the west and the rolling hills of Dutchess County to the east. Water temperature held steady at 58 degrees, and tidal conditions appeared normal for the season. At 3:47 a.m., the Coast Guard received an automated distress signal from the ferry's emergency beacon. When they reached the vessel 12 minutes later, they discovered something that would baffle investigators for months to come. The ferry was drifting in the middle of the Hudson, engines running steadily, but no one at the helm. The 2 passenger vehicles remained secured on the car deck, their occupants still asleep, completely unaware that anything had gone wrong. Coast Guard Petty Officer Lisa Chen was first aboard the empty ferry. According to her official report, the wheelhouse door was found locked from the inside. When they forced entry, Vandenberg's coffee cup sat half full on the control panel, still warm to the touch. His logbook lay open to the night's entry, the pen beside it as if he had just finished writing. His life jacket hung unused in its designated case. The ferry's navigation systems showed the vessel had maintained its proper course until 3:44 a.m., when the autopilot mysteriously disengaged, and the boat began drifting with the current. Security cameras on the car deck revealed nothing unusual until 3:43 a.m., when the timestamp showed a gap of exactly 47 seconds before resuming normal recording. A thorough search of the ferry revealed Vandenberg's personal effects exactly where they should be. His wallet contained $73 in family photos. His cell phone was charging beside the radio. His thermos of black coffee had been prepared according to the same routine he had followed for 3 decades. His coat hung on its usual hook, and his work boots remained positioned precisely beside his chair. Coast Guard vessels equipped with sonar and searchlights immediately began combing the crossing area, while helicopter crews scanned the water surface. The Hudson River at that point runs nearly 2 miles wide and reaches depths of over 100 feet in the main channel. Strong tidal currents and cold water temperatures made survival unlikely if someone had gone overboard. But search teams remained optimistic during those first crucial hours. By dawn, more than 24 rescue personnel had joined the search effort. Local volunteers arrived with small boats, and diving teams prepared to explore the river bottom near where the ferry had been found drifting. Yet, after 12 hours of intensive searching, no trace of Dutch Vandenberg had been discovered. Ulster County Sheriff Thomas Brennan held a press conference that afternoon. "We are treating this as a missing person case," he announced to local media gathered at the ferry terminal. "Captain Vandenberg is an experienced mariner with an exemplary safety record. We are exploring all possibilities and following every lead." But privately, investigators faced a question that would haunt the case from the beginning. How does an experienced captain disappear from his own locked wheelhouse without triggering any alarms, leaving behind no signs of struggle, and with no distress call or indication of an emergency? The ferry had continued its gentle drift until the Coast Guard took control, its engines humming normally, as if Vandenberg had simply stepped away for a moment and never returned. While search teams scoured the Hudson River for any trace of Dutch Vandenberg, Dr. Sarah Chen was already piecing together a disturbing pattern that would change the direction of the investigation entirely. Chen, a maritime historian at the State University of New York, had been studying Hudson River transportation incidents for 7 years. Her research, funded by a National Science Foundation grant, focused on documenting patterns of accidents and anomalies along the river's commercial waterways. What she had discovered would prove deeply unsettling to investigators. Ferry incidents cluster in specific locations, Chen explained to investigators 3 days after Vandenberg's disappearance. The Kingston and Rhinecliff crossing has recorded more unexplained incidents per mile than any other ferry route on the Hudson. Her database, compiled from Coast Guard records, newspaper archives, and maritime insurance reports, documented 17 unusual incidents at the crossing since 1923, including 2 previous cases of missing ferry personnel. Recent months had brought new concerns to Chen's attention. Sonar readings taken by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation showed unusual formations on the river bottom, directly beneath the ferry's path. Water temperature measurements revealed pockets of significantly colder water that appeared and disappeared without explanation. Most troubling were acoustic readings, sounds recorded by underwater monitoring equipment that didn't match any known Hudson River marine life. Meanwhile, environmental activist Miguel Santos had been raising alarms about the Hudson's changing conditions for months before Vandenberg vanished. A former commercial fisherman, Santos operated Hudson River Watch from a converted warehouse in Kingston, monitoring water quality and documenting environmental changes along a 50-mile stretch of the river. "Something's wrong down there," Santos had been telling anyone who would listen. Throughout the summer of 2023, his water sampling equipment detected unusual chemical signatures in the river, near the ferry crossing. Industrial runoff from upstream facilities, he argued, was creating dangerous conditions that state agencies were ignoring. "The river's ecosystem is being disrupted," Santos had warned in a letter to the Ulster County Board of Supervisors dated September 18, 2020. "We're seeing changes in fish populations, altered current patterns, and water chemistry that doesn't match historical norms." His concerns weren't purely environmental. As someone who had worked the Hudson for 23 years, Santos knew the river's rhythms intimately. "Fish avoid that crossing area now," he reported to investigators. "Species that used to school there regularly, striped bass, river heron, they swim around it like there's something they can sense that we can't." 3 weeks before Vandenberg's disappearance, Santos had approached ferry management with his concerns. In a meeting recorded in company files, Santos presented water samples showing elevated levels of industrial chemicals and unusually high concentrations of sediment that didn't originate from natural riverbank erosion. Ferry officials acknowledged his data but noted that all measurements remained within acceptable safety limits established by state agencies. The discovery of Vandenberg's personal logbooks revealed that the veteran captain had been documenting his own observations of changing river conditions. Entries dating back to early 2023 described what Vandenberg called bottom disturbances, unusual sonar readings that appear during certain tidal conditions, always in the same location near the midpoint of the crossing. A logbook entry from August 15, 2020 noted, "Sonar picking up large object movement at 94-foot depth. Current charts show riverbed at 87 feet in this location. Possible debris field or geological shift. Worth monitoring." Subsequent entries tracked these anomalies with increasing frequency, suggesting that whatever Vandenberg was observing was becoming more pronounced over time. By September 2023, Vandenberg's log entries had taken on an increasingly urgent tone. "Third night this week with unexplained readings," he wrote on September 24. "Something significant happening at depth. Water temperature dropping 8-10 degrees in localized area. Duration, 15-20 minutes during each incident. No correlation with weather patterns or known tidal phenomena." Chen's research revealed that similar observations had been recorded by ferry operators in 1987, 1995, and 2019, each time during late September or early October, always involving the night shift, and always concentrated at the same GPS coordinates where Vandenberg had disappeared. In each previous case, the unusual readings had been reported to ferry management, and then apparently dismissed or forgotten. Maritime workers are practical people, Chen observed during her interview with investigators. They don't report things unless they consider them significant. The fact that multiple operators across different decades have documented similar phenomena at the exact same location suggests something systematic is occurring. Environmental records obtained from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation confirmed Santos's industrial contamination concerns. Permits had been issued for upstream dredging operations during the summer of 2023, involving the removal of contaminated sediments from former industrial sites near Albany. The dredge materials, according to permit documentation, were being transported downriver for disposal at approved sites. Industrial waste has been dumped in the Hudson for over a century, Santos explained to county environmental officials. When you disturb those old contamination sites, you release materials that have been trapped in sediment layers for decades. Some of these chemicals can alter water density, affect marine life behavior, and even create hazardous gas pockets under certain conditions. As investigators compiled these environmental factors, a troubling pattern began to emerge. The Hudson River near the ferry crossing was changing in ways that veteran mariners noticed, but scientists were only beginning to understand. Whatever Dutch Vandenberg had encountered on his final crossing, the river had been sending warnings for months. The investigation into Dutch Vandenberg's disappearance would reveal that the veteran ferry captain had been conducting his own private research into the Hudson River's mysteries, research that may have led to his final fateful crossing. The Vandenberg family had operated ferries on the Hudson River since before the Revolutionary War. Dutch's ancestor, Johannes Vandenberg, established the first regular ferry service at Kingston in 1784, using a flat-bottomed scow powered by men with long poles. Family records, preserved in a cedar chest in Dutch's Rhinebeck home, documented nearly 2.5 centuries of accumulated river knowledge passed from father to son. Dutch knew things about that river that weren't in any manual, recalled ferry mechanic Tom Bradley, who had worked alongside Vandenberg for 18 years. He could read water conditions by the way morning fog formed over the surface. He knew exactly where the deepest channels ran, where the currents shifted with the seasons, and how the river bottom had changed over the decades. Vandenberg's home workshop, discovered by investigators a week after his disappearance, revealed the depth of his private obsession with understanding the Hudson's secrets. The converted garage contained maritime charts dating back to 1923, some hand-annotated with depth measurements, and current patterns that differed significantly from official navigation charts. On the walls hung underwater photographs, sonar printouts, and detailed sketches of river bottom topography. The most significant discovery was Vandenberg's collection of modified sonar equipment. Working with electronics salvaged from decommissioned Coast Guard vessels, he had assembled a sophisticated underwater monitoring system capable of detecting objects and movements far below the ferry's normal operating depth. Receipts found in his workshop showed he had spent over $8,000 of his own money on specialized sensors and recording equipment during the past 2 years. This wasn't hobby-level equipment, explained marine electronics specialist Janet Morrison, who examined Vandenberg's devices for investigators. He had configured a system that could track multiple objects simultaneously at depths up to 200 feet. The audio recording capability was particularly sophisticated, designed to capture and analyze underwater sounds across a wide frequency range. Vandenberg's detailed logs, discovered in a fireproof safe in his workshop, documented 4 years of systematic monitoring of unusual activity beneath the ferry crossing. The records showed that he had been tracking what he described as organized movement patterns occurring at regular intervals, always at night, always between October and March. Pattern analysis suggests intelligence behind movement. Read an entry from February 2023. Objects maintain consistent spacing, travel at uniform speed, respond to surface vessel presence. Acoustic signatures indicate hollow metallic composition. Duration of activity, 45-90 minutes per incident. Frequency increasing annually. Dock workers at the Kingston terminal confirmed that Vandenberg's behavior had changed noticeably during 2023. He started arriving 2 hours early for night shifts, reported terminal supervisor Lisa Chang. He'd spend that time adjusting equipment, checking instruments that weren't part of standard ferry operations. When asked about it, he'd say he was monitoring navigation conditions, but he never explained what that meant. Hello, Ferry Captain Robert Hayes recalled conversations with Vandenberg that had grown increasingly cryptic over the past year. Dutch would talk about them moving at night, Hayes told investigators. He'd say things like, "They're getting more active," or "the patterns are changing." I assumed he meant fish or maybe shipping traffic, but he'd never clarify when I asked directly. Oh, nah. Vandenberg's wife of 36 years, Margaret, revealed that her husband had been losing sleep over his river observations. He'd wake up at 2 a.m. and sit at the kitchen table with his charts and notebooks, she recalled during her interview with investigators. He was convinced something important was happening that nobody else was paying attention to. He said the river was trying to tell him something, but he couldn't understand what. Perhaps the most disturbing discovery in Vandenberg's workshop was a series of photographs taken with underwater cameras he had deployed from the ferry. The images, shot at depths between 90 and 120 feet, showed what appeared to be artificial structures on the river bottom. Geometric shapes that didn't match natural rock formations or known shipwrecks. Several photographs captured objects that seemed to be moving, though the water's turbidity made clear identification impossible. A photograph dated October 8, 2023, just 6 days before Vandenberg's disappearance, showed multiple dark shapes arranged in what appeared to be a deliberate pattern. Vandenberg's handwritten notes on the image read, "Formation suggests coordinated activity. Count, 7-9 distinct objects. Movement synchronized with tidal changes. Purpose unknown. Even by Marisa. Saturnia." Vandenberg had also been monitoring electromagnetic activity beneath the water. His equipment records showed regular spikes in electromagnetic readings that coincided with the visual sightings documented in his photographs. Signatures consistent with active electrical systems, noted an entry from September 2023. Power levels suggest significant energy consumption. Source location matches visual contact coordinates. Most significantly, Vandenberg's logs revealed that he had identified a precise pattern to the underwater activity. Peak activity occurs 3:34 a.m. during specific tidal windows, he wrote. Lunar cycle correlation. Highest activity during new moon phases. Seasonal pattern. Most active October through March. Weather correlation. Increased activity during low barometric pressure. This timing exactly matched when Vandenberg had disappeared. 3:44 a.m. on October 14, 2023. During a new moon phase, with falling barometric pressure preceding a weather front. Investigators found evidence that Vandenberg had attempted to contact maritime authorities about his observations. Draft letters addressed to the Coast Guard and the New York State Canal Corporation described his underwater monitoring data and requested official investigation. However, none of these letters had been sent. Instead, they remained in his workshop files, suggesting he had decided to investigate further before involving outside agencies. Vandenberg's final workshop entry, dated October 13th, the day before his disappearance, read simply, "Tomorrow night's conditions optimal for contact. All monitoring systems ready. If patterns hold, significant activity expected between 3:34-15 a.m. This may provide answers. Now we will for." Whatever Dutch Vandenberg had been tracking in the Hudson River's depths, he had been preparing for some kind of encounter with it on the night he vanished. As the investigation into Dutch Vandenberg's disappearance deepened, maritime historian Sarah Chen made a discovery that would transform the case from an isolated incident into part of a pattern spanning more than a century. Chen had been methodically reviewing incident reports in the Kingston Public Library's local history section, surrounded by stacks of yellowed newspapers and Ferry Commission records. What emerged from her research would chill everyone involved in the investigation. The pattern had been hiding in plain sight, buried in routine Coast Guard filings and insurance claims. 3 separate incidents, spread across 32 years, but all sharing eerily similar characteristics with Vandenberg's disappearance. On March 23, 1987, ferry operator James Morrison reported equipment malfunctions during a 3:45 a.m. crossing. His radio transmission cut out mid-sentence while describing unusual sonar readings. Morrison was found 20 minutes later, unconscious in the Wheelhouse, with no memory of the previous hour. The ferry had drifted nearly a quarter-mile downstream before Coast Guard intervention. 11 years later, in October 1998, Captain Rosa Delgado experienced what she described as a total electrical failure at 3:52 a.m. When backup power restored system 6 minutes later, Delgado discovered her logbook contained entries written in her handwriting that she didn't remember making. The entries referenced bottom movement and thermal layers shifting. Most unsettling was the incident from February 2019, just 8 months before Vandenberg's disappearance. Ferry operator Kevin Walsh reported feeling dizzy during a 3:33 a.m. crossing and activated emergency protocols. Coast Guard rescue found Walsh collapsed near the Wheelhouse door, alive but severely disoriented. His last clear memory was checking navigation charts at 3:15 a.m. Chen cross-referenced these incidents with tidal data from the National Weather Service. Each occurrence coincided with the same specific tidal condition, the transition period between high slack and ebb tide, when the Hudson's massive flow temporarily stalls before reversing direction. During these brief windows, the river's complex current patterns create underwater turbulence that experienced operators learn to navigate by instinct. But the pattern extended far beyond modern ferry records. Chen's research into 19th century newspapers revealed accounts that sent chills through the investigation team. An 1847 article in the Kingston Daily Freeman reported that ferry operator Cornelius Vandenberg had gone missing during an early morning crossing, his empty ferry found drifting near the same deep water location. The article mentioned whispers among river workers about phantoms that call from the depths during the quiet hours before dawn. An 1893 shipping manifest from the Hudson River Day Line noted routine delays for their Kingston stop between 3:30 and 4:00 a.m. due to what captains described as river disturbances. Passengers reported strange sounds from beneath the hull during these periods, sounds that didn't match known patterns of fish, debris, or thermal layers adjusting. Chen brought her findings to environmental activist Miguel Santos, whose monitoring work had made him intimately familiar with recent changes to the Hudson's ecosystem. Santos reviewed her timeline with growing concern, particularly the correlation with industrial activity. The timing is significant, Santos explained to investigators. Major sediment disruption from upstream dredging would affect tidal flow patterns downstream. If there were already natural conditions creating problems at that crossing point, industrial interference could have made them exponentially worse. Santos pulled county environmental impact reports that showed the 2018 dredging had removed over 50,000 cubic yards of river bottom sediment, some of it containing industrial contaminants from decades of manufacturing along the upper Hudson. The disturbed material had been relocated to containment areas, but Santos questioned whether adequate environmental assessment had been conducted. Dutch Vandenberg would have noticed changes in water behavior immediately, Santos continued. Ferry operators develop an almost supernatural sense for their route's rhythms. If something was different about that crossing, he would have felt it before any instruments detected it. The pattern suggested something far more complex than a single disappearance. For over 170 years, the Hudson River had been affecting people during those specific pre-dawn hours, when tidal forces created conditions that even experienced river operators couldn't fully predict or understand. Chen's research revealed one more troubling detail. In each documented incident from 1987 forward, ferry operators had mentioned unusual sonar readings in the days leading up to their experiences. Readings that suggested movement or activity on the river bottom that didn't correspond to known marine life or debris patterns. Every operator who experienced these incidents reported the same preliminary signs, Chen noted in her report to investigators. Unusual acoustic readings, temperature anomalies, and sonar contacts that didn't match anything in their experience. Dutch Vandenberg's logs show he was documenting these same phenomena for months before he disappeared. As investigators studied Chen's timeline, an uncomfortable question emerged. Was Dutch Vandenberg's disappearance an isolated tragedy, or the latest incident in a pattern that had been building for decades, possibly accelerated by recent human interference with the river's ancient rhythms? The evidence suggested that whatever was happening at the Kingston and Rhinecliff crossing during those critical pre-dawn hours, it had been claiming attention, and sometimes lives, for far longer than anyone had realized. The Hudson River, with its centuries of secrets, continued to flow toward the Atlantic, carrying with it mysteries that human understanding had yet to fathom. 3 weeks after Dutch Vandenberg's disappearance, Coast Guard Sector New York deployed the 87-foot patrol cutter, Catherine Walker, to conduct a comprehensive sonar mapping of the Kingston Rhinecliff crossing. What they discovered beneath the Hudson's surface would raise more questions than answers about the veteran ferry captain's fate. The initial sweep revealed a previously unmapped depression in the river bottom, located precisely at the coordinates where ferry incidents had occurred over the decades. The depression measured roughly 200 feet in diameter and dropped 40 feet below the surrounding river floor, deep enough to conceal a 3-story building. More puzzling was its shape, perfectly circular, with walls that descended at an unnatural 90-degree angle. In 30 years of river operations, I've never seen a bottom formation like this, Coast Guard Chief Warrant Officer Lisa Rodriguez told investigators. Natural scour holes are irregular, with gradual slopes carved by current action over time. This formation looked almost engineered. The depression didn't appear on any historical navigation charts, including detailed surveys conducted by the Army Corps of Engineers in 2015. Either it was a recent development, or previous mapping efforts had somehow missed a formation the size of a football field in one of the Hudson's most heavily trafficked areas. Meanwhile, investigators examining Dutch Vandenberg's workshop made a discovery that shed new light on his final weeks of monitoring. Hidden beneath his workbench, they found a modified fish finder that had been extensively altered with additional sensors and recording equipment. The device's memory contained audio files that Vandenberg had apparently been collecting during his night shifts. The recordings were unlike anything marine biologists had heard from the Hudson River. Instead of the familiar sounds of sturgeon movement, propeller wash, or thermal layers adjusting, Vandenberg's equipment had captured what sounded like rhythmic vibrations emanating from the river bottom. The sounds occurred in patterns, almost like a slow mechanical heartbeat, most prominent during the tidal transition periods when previous ferry incidents had occurred. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a marine acoustic specialist from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, analyzed Vandenberg's recordings at the request of Ulster County investigators. Her report raised troubling possibilities about the depression's nature and the sounds it might be generating. The acoustic signature suggests cavitation, essentially the formation and collapse of vapor bubbles in the water, Dr. Martinez explained to investigators. This typically occurs around fast-moving propellers or in areas where pressure differences create unstable conditions. But these readings suggest cavitation on a massive scale, originating from a stationary source on the river bottom. Environmental activist Miguel Santos had been conducting his own investigation, collecting water samples from the crossing area during different tidal conditions. His analysis revealed sediment composition that didn't match the surrounding river bottom. The samples contained unusually high concentrations of methane and hydrogen sulfide, gases typically associated with decomposing organic matter in anaerobic conditions. The chemistry suggests something is generating gas emissions from that depression, Santos reported to county environmental officials. Whether it's natural decomposition, industrial contamination interacting with river sediments, or something else entirely, it could explain why ferry operators experience disorientation during certain tidal conditions. Santos's theory gained credibility when investigators reviewed medical reports from the surviving ferry operators who had experienced incidents at the crossing. Each had shown symptoms consistent with mild hydrogen sulfide exposure: dizziness, memory lapses, and disorientation. The symptoms aligned perfectly with the timing of their reported equipment malfunctions. But maritime historian Sarah Chen's research suggested an alternative explanation that reached much deeper into the region's past. Digging through colonial archives, she discovered references to the deep place in Dutch settlement documents from the 1600s. Early European settlers had noted that Native American guides avoided crossing the river at that specific location during certain times, claiming the water there was troubled by old spirits. More significantly, Chen found evidence that the depression might not be recent at all. An 1820 survey conducted for canal construction purposes contained a notation about unusual depth soundings at the Kingston crossing. The notation mentioned measurements that didn't align with surrounding river depths, but the anomaly had been dismissed as equipment error by 19th century surveyors. What if this formation has been there for centuries? Chen asked investigators during a case review meeting. What if industrial activity upstream simply activated or destabilized something that had been dormant for generations? Her theory gained support from geological surveys conducted in the 1960s, which had detected unusual rock formations beneath the Hudson in that area. The surveys suggested the possibility of limestone caverns or underground river channels that might connect to the main river through the circular depression. As winter approached, Coast Guard investigators made one final discovery that would haunt everyone involved in the case. Using advanced side-scan sonar, they detected what appeared to be man-made objects scattered across the bottom of the depression. The objects were too deep and conditions too dangerous to retrieve safely, but sonar images suggested metal debris, possibly including parts of boats or ferry equipment that had found their way into the depression over time. The revelation that the river bottom depression contained debris raised a chilling possibility. Had other people disappeared at this location over the years? Their losses attributed to accidents or drownings rather than the specific conditions that Vandenberg might have discovered? Dr. Martinez's final acoustic analysis revealed one more unsettling detail. The rhythmic vibrations that Vandenberg's equipment had recorded were strongest during the exact tidal conditions when ferry incidents occurred. Whatever was causing the sounds appeared to be triggered by the specific pressure and current changes that happened during the transition between high slack and ebb tide. It's as if the river bottom is responding to tidal pressure, Dr. Martinez concluded in her report. But the scale of acoustic activity suggests something much larger than normal geological settlement. Dutch Vandenberg was recording evidence of something that we still don't understand. The Hudson River continued its eternal flow toward the Atlantic, carrying with it secrets that modern science was only beginning to glimpse. Whatever lay within that perfectly circular depression, it had been affecting the crossing for far longer than anyone had realized. As investigators compiled months of evidence from Dutch Vandenberg's disappearance, 4 distinct theories emerged to explain what happened during those crucial minutes on October 14, 2023. Each theory was supported by compelling evidence, yet each left fundamental questions unanswered. Ulster County Sheriff's Department initially pursued the most straightforward explanation: accidental drowning during routine deck inspection. Deputy Chief Michael Torres noted that ferry operators regularly performed safety checks during night crossings, especially when experiencing equipment anomalies. Dutch was a thorough professional who took safety protocols seriously, Torres explained during a press briefing. If his sonar equipment was showing unusual readings, standard procedure requires visual inspection of the vessel's exterior. A momentary loss of balance, a wet deck surface, and even an experienced mariner could end up in the water. This theory seemed plausible until investigators examined the physical evidence more carefully. Vandenberg's safety equipment remained completely untouched in the wheelhouse. His life jacket hung in its designated mount. His emergency beacon remained clipped to the control panel, and his safety line was still coiled on its hook. Most puzzling was the wheelhouse door, which Coast Guard rescuers found locked from the inside. If Dutch had gone outside for inspection, someone would have had to lock that door from inside the wheelhouse after he fell overboard, Torres acknowledged to investigators. Unless there was another person on that ferry, which all evidence contradicts, the accident theory doesn't explain the locked door. Environmental activist Miguel Santos proposed a different explanation based on his extensive water quality analysis and research into industrial contamination. Santos believed that gas emissions from the river bottom depression had created a hazardous atmospheric condition that caused Vandenberg to lose consciousness. Hydrogen sulfide and methane gases are heavier than air, Santos explained to county investigators. If the river bottom disturbance was releasing gas bubbles, they could accumulate in the ferry's lower levels or around the wheelhouse during certain wind and tidal conditions. Dutch might have been overcome by gas exposure and collapsed somewhere on the vessel. Santos's theory explained the disorientation experienced by previous ferry operators and aligned with his water chemistry findings. However, it couldn't account for several key facts. Security cameras from the Rhinecliff terminal, though distant, showed the ferry's exterior lights functioning normally throughout most of the crossing. If Vandenberg had collapsed outside, the vessel's motion-activated safety lights would have remained illuminated. The lights went dark at 3:47 a.m., suggesting either a complete electrical failure or someone deliberately shutting down systems. Maritime historian Sarah Chen offered the most complex theory, drawing from her extensive research into the crossing's long history of unexplained incidents. Chen believed that industrial dredging upstream had destabilized a natural underwater formation that had been affecting river conditions for centuries. The evidence suggests this location has been problematic since Dutch colonial times, Chen told investigators during a comprehensive case review. If limestone caverns or underground channels exist beneath that river bottom depression, industrial sediment disruption could have altered water pressure and flow patterns in ways we don't fully understand. No, not a base, sir. Chen's research revealed that major river engineering projects often triggered unexpected consequences years or even decades later. The construction of locks and dams on the upper Hudson had permanently changed tidal patterns throughout the river system. Recent dredging operations might have been the final factor that made an already unstable underwater formation dangerous during specific tidal conditions. Her theory suggested that Vandenberg might have discovered evidence of systematic changes to river conditions and was conducting his own investigation when something went catastrophically wrong. But Chen's historical focus couldn't explain the immediate mechanism of his disappearance or address the mystery of the locked wheelhouse door. The ferry crew who worked with Vandenberg daily proposed perhaps the most unsettling theory. According to senior deckhand Robert Chen, no relation to the historian, Vandenberg had been increasingly concerned about safety conditions at the crossing and had been systematically documenting evidence to present to ferry management. Dutch wasn't just curious about those sonar readings, Chen told investigators. He was genuinely worried. Really worried. He kept saying something wasn't right about the river, that the crossing was becoming dangerous during night shifts. He was building a comprehensive case to either change the schedule or modify the route entirely. This theory suggested that Vandenberg had discovered something significant enough to require immediate action, perhaps dangerous enough to justify abandoning standard safety protocols. The locked wheelhouse door might indicate that Vandenberg was trying to protect evidence or prevent someone else from accessing the ferry's control systems. But the crew theory raised its own troubling questions. If Vandenberg had discovered evidence of dangerous conditions, why hadn't he radioed for assistance? The ferry's communication systems were functioning perfectly when Coast Guard rescuers boarded the vessel. Emergency protocols required immediate contact with shore stations whenever any safety concern arose. Each theory was supported by some evidence while contradicted by other facts. The accident theory couldn't explain the locked door or untouched safety equipment. The gas exposure theory didn't account for the functioning exterior lights or the selective system shutdown. The geological theory offered no mechanism for immediate disappearance. The discovery theory failed to explain why Vandenberg didn't call for help. Most troubling of all, none of the theories addressed the fundamental question that haunted everyone involved in the investigation. Where was Dutch Vandenberg? Coast Guard search operations had covered hundreds of square miles of river and shoreline. Sonar mapping had identified the river bottom depression and its mysterious contents, but revealed no trace of the missing ferry operator. The Hudson River had claimed boats, cargo, and lives throughout its long history. But, typically, the river eventually surrendered its secrets to currents and tides. Bodies surfaced downstream, debris washed ashore. Evidence emerged to explain tragedies and provide closure to families. In Dutch Vandenberg's case, the river offered no answers, only deeper mysteries that seemed to resist every attempt at rational explanation. As winter ice began forming along the Hudson's banks, investigators were forced to acknowledge that they might never know what happened during those crucial minutes between 3:30 and 3:47 a.m. on that October night when an experienced ferry captain vanished without a trace. On December 15, 2023, nearly 2 months after Dutch Vandenberg's disappearance, the Kingston and Rhinecliff ferry resumed full operations with new safety protocols that reflected the hard lessons learned from the investigation. Every ferry operator now maintains constant radio contact with shore stations during night crossings. Check-ins occur every 10 minutes, with mandatory status reports during the critical 3:30 to 4:00 a.m. time window when previous incidents had occurred. The wheelhouse door can no longer be locked from the inside, and all operators wear emergency beacons that activate automatically if they remain motionless for more than 5 minutes. Captain Maria Santos, no relation to environmental activist Miguel Santos, took over Dutch Vandenberg's route. A 20-year veteran of Hudson River operations, she approached the assignment with professional resolve tempered by deep respect for the mysteries her predecessor had encountered. Dutch was a riverman through and through, Captain Santos told investigators during her first week on the route. Whatever happened to him wasn't carelessness or inexperience. That ferry was his second home, and he knew every sound, every vibration, every quirk of the crossing. If something got past Dutch Vandenberg's guard, it was something none of us have encountered before. The new safety protocols couldn't address the fundamental questions that Vandenberg's disappearance had raised about conditions at the crossing. Coast Guard officials quietly updated navigation warnings for the Kingston route, noting unusual bottom conditions that required extra caution during tidal transitions. Commercial traffic received advisories about the river bottom depression, but officials offered no explanation for its formation or potential hazards. Miguel Santos continued his environmental monitoring of the crossing area, collecting water samples and measuring gas emissions during different weather and tidal conditions. His data revealed ongoing chemical anomalies in the water around the depression, but federal environmental agencies declined to launch a comprehensive investigation. The bureaucracy wants this to disappear, Santos explained in an interview with the Kingston Daily Freeman, 6 months after Vandenberg's vanishing. Industrial interests upstream don't want questions about dredging permits, and nobody wants to admit that we might have destabilized something in the river that we don't understand and can't control. Maritime historian Sarah Chen expanded her research, reaching out to ferry operators and marine workers throughout the Hudson River system. Her survey revealed a disturbing pattern of unreported incidents at various crossing points, particularly during night shifts when fewer witnesses and officials were present. Operators from Newburgh, Poughkeepsie, and Albany reported experiences similar to those documented at Kingston. Equipment malfunctions during specific tidal conditions, unusual sonar readings, and brief periods of disorientation that they attributed to fatigue or equipment quirks. Most had never filed official reports, dismissing their experiences as routine occupational hazards. The river community has been dealing with these incidents for decades without connecting them, Chen concluded in her expanded report. Dutch Vandenberg's disappearance might not be unique. It might just be the first time someone vanished completely, instead of simply experiencing temporary effects. Vandenberg's workshop remained sealed as evidence for months, but family members were eventually allowed to recover personal items. His collection of historical river charts and modified sonar equipment raised questions that investigators couldn't answer. Why had he been so focused on documenting changes to river bottom conditions? What had he discovered that warranted such extensive private research. His nephew, David Vandenberg, inherited Dutch's house and found additional materials that hadn't been seized as evidence. Personal journals revealed that Dutch had been corresponding with retired ferry operators dating back to the 1970s, collecting their stories about unusual incidents and unexplained experiences on the Hudson. Uncle Dutch thought there was a pattern to what was happening on the river, David told investigators during a follow-up interview. He believed that changes in shipping traffic, industrial activity, and maybe climate patterns were making old problems worse. He was trying to prove that the river itself was trying to warn people about something. The journals contained hand-drawn maps showing locations where ferry operators, tugboat captains, and commercial fishermen had reported anomalies over the past 50 years. The maps revealed clusters of incidents at specific crossing points, all characterized by unusual depth measurements and complex current patterns during tidal transitions. As the first anniversary of Vandenberg's disappearance approached, new ferry operators began reporting familiar problems. Captain Santos documented 3 separate instances of unusual sonar readings during night crossings, always occurring between 3:30 and 4, always at the same location where the river bottom depression had been discovered. The sounds are exactly what Dutch's equipment recorded, Santos reported to Coast Guard officials. Rhythmic vibrations from below, lasting about 15 minutes, then stopping abruptly when the tide fully turns. Whatever is causing them is still active down there. Dorse. Most unsettling, Santos reported brief periods of dizziness during these incidents, similar to what previous operators had experienced. Medical examinations revealed no health problems, and air quality monitors in the Wheelhouse detected no hazardous gases. Yet something about the crossing continued to affect people during those specific tidal conditions. The Hudson River maintains its ancient rhythms, carrying commercial traffic and commuters across its waters as it has for centuries. The Kingston and Rhinecliff ferry makes its scheduled crossings, connecting 2 communities separated by the river's dark expanse. Passengers board and disembark, largely unaware of the mysteries that persist beneath the surface. But those who work the river, the operators, the dock workers, the marine maintenance crews, remembered Dutch Vandenberg and the questions his disappearance raised. They watch their instruments more carefully during night shifts, maintain constant communication with shore stations, and respect the river's power in ways that previous generations might have forgotten. The Hudson continues its eternal flow toward the Atlantic, carrying with it the unanswered questions about what happened to a veteran ferry operator who knew its currents better than anyone, yet vanished without explanation during a routine crossing that should have been as familiar as breathing. Somewhere beneath those dark waters, Dutch Vandenberg's fate remains hidden, another mystery in a river that has witnessed centuries of human ambition, tragedy, and the endless cycle of tides that connect the mountains to the sea. The crossing continues, but the river keeps its secrets, flowing silently past the place where one man's search for answers led him into a mystery that may never be solved.